What are the relationships that feel extractive? What are the relationships that feel that way and you are clear they need completing? What are the relationships that feel that way and you need to modify your orientation around that relationship and orient yourself more to those who are going to reciprocate and pour into you? Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. I'm your host, and I'm grateful to be with you for another episode. Today, I want to talk about something that I have personally experienced. And to be honest, I actually am re-recording this episode because the first time I recorded this episode, I feel like there was a limited insight. And then I had a conversation with a very good friend who expanded not only my perspective on this, but also expanded my vocabulary around this sort of experience. And the experience I'm talking about is this experience of relationship fatigue. Now, what I mean by that is there are some relationships that can feel very unreciprocal. It's the relationship with a friend or with a family member or with even a child, where we are always in the giving space. We're always in the outreach space. We're always going first. Now, just to name, in the parent-child relationship, this is how it is. So I'm not going to include that in this particular context very much, because I do understand that in a lot of spaces, as a parent with children in the younger years, it is going to largely feel unreciprocated. It is going to largely feel like we're being extracted from. And that's just a part of parenting. That doesn't negate the fact that we can feel some unappreciated. We can feel, as parents, resentful even at times. And I think it's useful to normalize emotion around parenting and feeling unappreciated, because that's just part of the process, right? It doesn't mean that we blame our kids for that. It's just understanding our kids are kids. They're in stages of development that this is how it goes. And so understanding that parenting is a largely unreciprocated relationship until it is. And then when there is reciprocation, then that is a gift. Now, that's not to say our kids won't love up on us and our kids won't reciprocate in ways that are appropriate for their age level. It's just to say this is a global, this can be a universal parenting experience that we can normalize. Aside from that, though, these spaces of unreciprocation can occur in the workplace. They can occur in our intimate partner relationships. They can occur in our sibling and our friend and community relationships. And it's important to recognize that being a person that always goes first, that always is the initiator, can always is the person checking in, can come with its benefits and its gifts, and can also come with its costs. And so I want to talk about this because I think that this is a space that many people experience, maybe can't put a finger on, maybe don't talk about, maybe are afraid to broach with the person that they're actually experiencing this with. When it's suppressed, it can create a state of loneliness and resentment. This is also what can happen when we are engaging in these types of behaviors with the wrong person, with a person who doesn't feel safe to us, with the person who only reaches back when they need something from us. And I've experienced this in my life with past friends that of which I realized that I needed to complete that relationship. And one in particular where I was the person who was always checking in. I was the person who was always reaching out. I was the person who was always inviting this friend to lunch or dinner. I was the one that was organizing my calendar around her. And at the end of the day, it came to a point where I realized that I was the one reciprocating everything. I was always the one initiating everything and made a request for what I needed. That request was not honored and actually, in fact, ended up being invalidated and a little bit gaslit. And this was the place where I recognized, oh, this was not the right person for which to go first. When we are in relationships like that, we start to recognize it. Our body will recognize it before, our hearts will recognize it before we can name it, usually. And typically, it feels resentment. Sometimes it feels loneliness. Sometimes it feels like exhaustion in that relationship when you're feeling exhausted. And so that can be a clue that maybe one of two things needs to happen. I would say at first, maybe we need to have a conversation with I feel like. Now, it's important to recognize that we train people in their behavior. And so we want to be responsible and accountable for the fact that up until a certain point, if we've been the initiators and allowed the other person to just sit back and receive and have not asked for what we wanted, then there's a conversation to be had and a retraining to be done. And I say this with the understanding that sometimes we don't have the bandwidth for that and we need to put space. And when we put space, what that does is that actually allows people to step into the space. Sometimes being the initiator all the time is a space of control. Unconsciously, okay, I want to control the way, the interactions of the relationship. Sometimes it's a natural giving space, but it can burn one out. It can fatigue one to always be in the space of initiating, whether it's initiating a hello, initiating a resolution when conflict arises, initiating the conversation of how are we, what's working, what's not working, where are we if it's an intimate partner relationship. So that can be exhausting over time. And when we start to share honestly about what our experience is and then pull back and allow the space for the other person to step up and step into the role of the initiator so that it balances things out, then that gives us information about their capacity and willingness. All right. And so then I think it's also important to recognize that when we do have that conversation and we do make that ask and we do pull back and allow the space for them to step in and they don't, then that also is information for us. It may not be the right person. This may not be a safe person to be an available person. And this may not be a person with whom it's safe to have these kinds of conversations. And so we want to right size those expectations. There's a saying, expectations are set up for resentment. And so if we're having an expectation of a person who doesn't have the capacity, it will end in resentment. And having said that, going first with the right people can provide wonderful feedback. In fact, this morning at the time of this recording, I had a conversation with my friend, and I would call her a sister in transformation, Jasmine Bellamy, who is the host of the podcast Loving Leader. And so shout out. And she asked me how I was doing. And with the right people, with the people who are safe, I do make it a point to be honest about how I'm doing. And so in the moment, I was feeling emotional, feeling the weight of some grief, some emotion. And so I shared that with her. And I shared with her that I had just been recording this podcast about going first. And so what came afterwards was this beautiful conversation of recognition, of pouring into, of empowering, very reciprocal, both in and out. And what she said to me was that I think one of the gifts of going, what she said to me was the gift to her that day is that I went first because it allowed for the deepening of our connection and conversation that day. And so, with that, I say there are gifts, there are benefits to going first. And one of those is providing impact and modeling behavior. Also, it gives permission for real conversations. It gives permission for connection and empathy and intimacy. And it gives permission for the other person to be vulnerable as well. So when we are always staying on the surface, then there's no opportunity for deepening of relationship and of connection. But if we have capacity and we're encouraged and we're willing to go first in the relationships with those right people, those people who are safe, those people who are known to reciprocate, then the gift is that deep connection. And oftentimes we gain something from it as well. Going first is not all bad. And I think when we talk about relationship fatigue, we have to recognize where we are going first in relationships that are not reciprocal. And how we recognize those relationships is usually the feeling that it gives in our body every time we reach out and there's no reciprocation, or when we are reaching out to the point where we start to have a negative experience in our body around it, and maybe even an expectation that they won't reply, or resentment, right? And so what happens is when we are initiating in relationships that are non-reciprocal, it's harmful. It's harmful, and it creates a wound. And it's important. And even if you're in a relationship where you can't just leave that relationship, we always have a choice, but you're not going to just leave the relationship. But it is like an extractive relationship or an unreciprocated relationship. What are the things that you can do to take care of yourself, both in that relationship and both being in community with people who do have the capacity to pour back into you? What are the practices that are at play? And so these are some of the things that I am grateful to have had this conversation with my friend, because the recognizing that we all have choice in our relationships, but we just have to recognize what kind of relationship we're in so that we know what choices to make and when to make them. And in terms of staying in, maybe it's not completely leaving, but it's modifying how we view the relationship, the expectation of the relationship. Maybe it's creating a little distance. Maybe it's balancing out by adding more people who are pouring into you. So I think these are the things that to think about when we think about relationship fatigue. Thinking about how many relationships do we have that are pouring into us? Because when we have enough relationships pouring into us, then those relationships that feel a little bit less reciprocated, and especially those relationships that maybe we are not ready to leave, like we're not ready to totally complete, we can maybe create a different orientation to that relationship. So I have an orientation to certain people in my life that I know our relationship is largely not reciprocal, that I'm the one reaching out. And that orientation is to give space. And when I can do it for fun and for free, meaning when I can do it without feeling a negative kinesthetic in my body, without a resentment, then I reach out. There are people in my life where we don't talk often and we have an understanding and it is reciprocal. So maybe I don't talk to them for a month or a couple of months, but every couple of months I get a call or a text or an outreach from them, and and then we'll put something on the calendar and we get together. Or every couple of months, they will outreach to me, and then we'll get together and it'll be like no time's passed. And we know those relationships exist too. So I invite you to explore, what relationships are you in where you go first often, but it's reciprocated and it's met with a pouring in. It's met with deepening of vulnerability. It's met with real conversation. It's met with modeling and growth and impact. And it feels good to go first in that moment. And maybe you're not always going first, but you have initiated. What are those relationships? And what are the relationships where you're always initiating and you're not getting reciprocated? You're not getting reciprocity. You're not getting any feedback. What are the relationships that feel extractive? What are the relationships that feel that way and you are clear they need completing? What are the relationships that feel that way and you need to modify your orientation around that relationship and orient yourself more to those who are going to reciprocate and pour into you? All right. And then the last question I have is, in those relationships that you feel like you're initiating a lot, but there's some reciprocation, what are the areas where you're initiating? It could be that maybe the relationship is reciprocal, but you're always the one that goes for resolution when there's conflict, or you're always the one that's initiating the get together or the plans. And maybe that there's just a conversation that needs to be had about what your needs are, asking for what you need. So these are the things to contemplate and in your relationships, and to avoid, minimize relationship fatigue. From my point of view, of course, I'm sure that you can think of many others, and I would love to hear from you as to what those things are. Leave a review, send me a message, and also share this episode. If this resonates with you, save to come back to it and share this with a friend, a colleague, a family member. Maybe this is a conversation starter for you all. And let me know what comes up. If you were on the YouTube platform, leave a comment. I do read my comments. And if you were on one of the podcast platforms like Apple or Google Play, please feel free to leave a review and a comment to let me know what you thought of this episode. All right, so go forth and connect and express your needs and evaluate your relationships. And until the next time I see you, stay empowered.